Hi, this is Misbehavin'. Welcome to a new episode of Behavin' with Misbehavin'. I would like to introduce my co-host, Wolf Bane.
Hey.
I will actually be interviewing him today about knife making. He is a blacksmith, and he will be answering questions to inform the audience about how it is done, the history of his work, and etc. Now, when did you start forging?
Say about 4 years ago, maybe 5. Now I'll go with 4 years ago.
Why did you start?
Ever since I was little, I always found fascination with blacksmiths and like movies and video games. I thought they were just cool, and what's more manly than taking a red hot piece of metal and making something that you could kill someone with? And then after my mom died, it was one of those things of I kept telling myself I would do this, so I'm going to do it. And I watched a lot of YouTube channels, and I made my first forge, which was a piece of crap. I'll tell you, the first thing I tried to do is to make a sword in the first day, using crap steel and a crap forge, without any know-how, and I burnt it in half. I said, how could I burn metal? But just to let you know, you can burn metal.
That's quite funny, actually. What made it crappy steel?
Because there's many different classification of steels. There's high carbon steels, medium steels, and shit steels. And then each category can be broken down to many subcategories, which I could ramble on for ages about. The kind of steels I prefer using for knife making is 5160 spring steel. I like using it because it's a pretty easy steel to get if you're a beginner or an experienced knife maker. It's from the leaf springs of cars or tractors, trucks. So you can find them at any junkyard, but it's a very versatile and good steel. It holds up a very good edge and really tough.
What was the best out of all the steels that there is? Was the best steel?
It really does come down to just what you plan to use it for. If you're going to be making a kitchen knife, you wouldn't use the same kind of steel that you would use for a machete or a big Bowie knife. Big knives and big chopping blades, you normally would want a not quite as hard steel, because since you're going to be using it to hack down heavy stuff, you don't want to just chip off pieces of the edge that a hard steel would. You'd want a little bit more mild of a steel. Like for machete, lawnmower blades are great for machetes because low carbon steel. So instead of having the blade chip or break, it will bend, which you can just resharpen and bend back. For a kitchen knife, you're not going to be trying to hack down a tree with a kitchen knife. So you can use a harder steel, so it keeps a very sharp edge for much longer than a machete would. And then all the knives in between, it really does just come down to what you want to use it for. And I could list off quite a few different steels right now. There's O1 steel, that's a very common steel for general knives. There's a W2. There's a ton of them. I'm not an expert in any one particular of them. I consider myself a scrap blacksmith. I use whatever scraps are at hand. So if I have a leaf spring on hand, I'll make a knife out of a leaf spring. If I have a flat plate of 1075 steel, I'll use that to make a knife or a sword out of. If I have a nice sword hanging on my wall that I made out of a scrap piece of 1075 steel that my friend gave me. Any high carbon steel will work for just about any knife. It's just you can always use better. The show Forge and Fire, that's a good example. some of the newer episodes, they literally give them a pile of junk and they're supposed to make a blade out of it. And a lot of the steel they're presented with is not good quality steel, but they still make a very good knife that holds up to the test. And for any of you who are confused about some of the knife names, like O1 steel, I don't know why they call it O1 steel, or the W2 steel, I don't know why they call it that, but I know for high carbon steel, like the 1075 that I use, the 10 stands for high carbon. So anything with any steel with the name or the 10 in front of it means high carbon, and the two numbers after it means the percentage. So 1075 steel means it's a high carbon steel with 75% carbon in it. The higher the number is for the carbon, the strong or the harder the steel will be. Now, having a hard blade is not the key to everything. You can't have a too hard of a blade. If your blade is hard like glass, yeah, it will be sharp and keep an edge, but it'll also break on first impact, which is why you need to heat treat your blades properly.
Okay, before I continue with more questions, I will say that me and him actually do have a company called Wolf Forge, and I will have the link in the description to the Facebook page for that. Now, what exactly is heat treating?
Oh, I'm actually happy you asked that. Heat treating is, okay, after you're done doing the forging, where you heat up your knife or blade or whatever the hell you're making, and you pound it out, and it's just about a ready piece. You need to do what they call the quench, which you heat it up red hot after you get to the shape that you want, and while it's at critical heat, not just below melting point, but not too far below, where it's red hot. Normally look for bright cherry red. You stick that in either a bucket of water or oil, depending on what steel you're using. Steel like the 1075, that's safe to use for water quenching, where the 5160 steel that I use also, that's for oil quenching. The difference between oil quenching and water quenching is one cools it faster. Water will cool it faster, and it will make it harder faster. The problem with that is certain steels are a bit more temperamental, and they'll be more likely to either crack or bend or just break, which I've had that happen to me before. There's nothing more frustrating than having a knife that you've been working on for a day, go to quench it, and it snaps in water. It's the most painful thing you can think of, seeing something you worked so hard on be turned to trash. Oil quenching for certain steels, you're supposed to use hot oil, and that slows the cooling process just enough on it where it doesn't stress the metal. And once you're done with the quenching, you'll have a piece of high carbon hardened steel. Now you might think, oh, now it's super hard. Awesome. No, not awesome. Yes, you can put a super edge on there, and it will cut really good until you hit something hard, and it will break and shatter on you. So you have to do what they call tempering, where you stick into a furnace back in the forge or an oven, depending on the size or shape of it, of the piece that you're tempering, and you, in a controlled setting, heat it up slightly. Now for knives, it ranges between 400 or 450 to 500 degrees for about an hour for a standard knife, at least in my experience. It lowers the carbon on it just enough and lowers the hardness on it just enough where it will have a little bit of give. Not too much so it loses its edge and becomes a crap knife, but just enough where it won't break if you drop it or if you hit something hard with it. It can be very tricky. It's something I still sometimes have a hard time with, especially when I'm experimenting with new metals. Something that a lot of people don't understand about blacksmiths are that it is a science. You do have to know your metallurgy. It's amazing the people back in the old days did as well as they did without knowledge of atoms and molecules and stuff that we do today. Modern steel companies, it's all on a microscopic level as I'm testing and surveying and seeing the amount of carbon, visually seeing it in microscopes and coming up with formulas for super steels. Now, speaking of steel, something that a lot of people don't know, that people think that steel and iron are different. There's like two different ores that you smelt down. No, steel is iron. It is the purified form of iron. Um, Pretty much, you take iron ore and you melt it down. You have to get it to beyond critical heat till it is nothing but a runny pool of liquid metal. And you have to get all the impurities out. Now, if you ever seen in like movies and stuff, when you see a blacksmith hit a piece of hot metal, you see all the sparks go everywhere. That's from impurities, or what they call slag, in the metal. Now, back then, before they had high quality furnaces, which they could get the metal super hot to get the impurities out, they had to literally hammer a lot of impurities out. Nowadays, with most knife makers, they don't have that problem with sparks flying everywhere because they're using pretty pure steel. Unless you're going to the old route of melting down your own metal, which I give props to people who do that, but fuck that.
Okay, you talked earlier about if you don't heat treat it right, your knife will break, or your sword. Now, if a sword or a knife or whatever you're making breaks, is it fixable or is it pretty much trash?
That's a good question. And to the contrary, if you break a knife or a sword, it is garbage. I know everyone saw the Lord of the Rings movie Return of the King, where the sword was forged back together. No. Because yes, you could theoretically forge weld it back together, but it will always be a weak point in that blade, which can never be trusted. The only way to reuse a broken blade is to remelt it down and restart from scratch. Unless you're just doing a wall hanger, I would never recommend anyone welding a sword or a knife back together. It's just too unsafe. I've seen people have knives break and swords break and get injured by it. There's actually a funny video on one of those channels late or early in the morning where they're trying to hawk whatever items they're trying to sell on TV. They showed a guy selling these ninja swords, and he was raving about, they're high quality stainless steel, and he was hitting it on the table, showing how tough they were, and the damn thing snapped, flung back, and stabbed him in the leg, and you just see him rising on the ground bleeding. Really funny. Which brings me to stainless steel. Stainless steel sucks. And what I mean by it sucks, it's stainless steel, yeah. It will not rust or tarnish as easily as most other metals. The problem is you can never get a really good edge on it. If you do, it's going to dull. And it's kind of a temperamental steel. It's also a little too hard. It will break if you hit it against something. That's why kitchen knives, stainless steel is good for kitchen knives, but if you get a Bowie knife that's stainless steel, it just keep on your mantelpiece. I wouldn't take it out and actually use it.
Okay, well, in your opinion, what is your favorite steel to use? Whether you can actually afford to use it or not, what is your favorite steel?
Out of the ones I've worked with?
Any steel at all. Whether you can afford to use it or not, if you've ever used it, what is your favorite steel ever?
Well,
and why?
Well, we're talking about steel or metal alloys. If I could get my hands on it, I wouldn't mind making a tungsten steel sword or a titanium Bowie knife, or have a meteor crash in my backyard and and smelt down the metal out of that, make a super vibranium sword like He-Man or some crap like that. And I know vibranium, He-Man didn't have vibranium. It's just the first thing that came to my mind. No, for practical uses, from my experience, I actually do like the Spring Steel 5160. It can be temperamental at times, but it's a high quality steel. It will take a good edge and take a good beating. You just have to be careful with the heat treating. That's all I'll say with that.
And why do you have to be temperamental? Like, why do you have to be cautious with the heat treating on those ones?
Because it is prone to being stressed out. Yes, metal can be stressed. When you're forging a knife or a sword, every hammer blow you do to it is putting more stress in the metal. That's why it's also recommended that if you're doing like a really big thing that you don't want anything to happen to in the quench, after you're done heating it, or after you're done forging it, heat it up and let it cool naturally. Anneal it. That takes out all the stress, and it makes it a pretty like flimsy knife. Like you could probably end up bending it with your hands, but it takes out all the stress. Because, like I said, it builds up stress through the forging and pounding and heating, or the heating and the forging, the hammering. After you anneal it, you can stick it back in and harden it, and you'll have less chance of breaking. But back to the question, 5160 in my experience, since it has to be oil quenched metal or steel, it doesn't need to be oil quenched. It is highly recommended. Believe me, you can do it with water, but probably about half your knives will end up breaking on it. It's like I said, it's prone to take on stress more than other steels, in my opinion. And being that you have to quench it in oil, you have to make sure the oil's hot enough. It just can be finicky, but I still like it. My second favorite that I've worked with so far would be the 1075. Good carbon steel. I don't think it's quite as durable as the spring steel, but pretty good actually. Like, I actually now I'm thinking that I'm not even sure, because I remember the other day I gave my friend Doc Hardtree a Gladius that I made a long time ago, which was made out of the spring steel, and I have my Viking broadsword on the wall that's made out of the 1075. And the other day, I actually hit them both together, just messing around, just seeing what damage it would do. The 1075 still didn't get a scratch. His did though, which surprised me a lot. So I might be wrong. I am still kind of new to the 1075. Overall, I'll just give them the same. They probably both have their own characteristics that I'm still discovering. But that's all I have to say about that. What would be the next question? Misbehaving.
Well, we're going to detour a little bit from the question for a second. I will tell the viewers now that we have recently moved in with each other, and we're currently in the process of making a forge at the current house. So we will be uploading videos of how to make knives and all that sort of thing, so stay tuned for that also in the future. Now the next question I have is, do you like what you do?
Oh, I would say I like what I do, or else I wouldn't be doing it.
Well, not necessarily. People do a lot of things that they don't like just because it makes them money. So, do you like what you do just because you like what you do, or because it makes you money?
Well, since I'm not laying on a big pile of money right now, I'm just going to say it's because I like to do it.
Okay. So, what kind of tools do you use?
pretty simple tools. Pretty much, I just stare at the metal long enough until it gets red hot, and then I pound it with my big meaty fist until it becomes a super mega sword.
Yes, because you're Thor.
Yes, and then when I grind down the edge, I use my teeth. But no, on all seriousness, pretty much I have my set of hammers. I have a 4-pound cross beam hammer. That's my heavy workhorse hammer. I have a 32-ounce ball peen hammer. I have I'm not sure what the weight of it is. I found that old hammerhead that I use for general work. I have my tiny ball peen hammer that's like half pound. I do that for intricate work. I have my forge. It's kind of essential if I want to heat anything. And I have my makeshift anvil that I got from a railroad track. Now, if you are new to blacksmith, if you were wanting to do blacksmithing, I'd say 3 very simple things you need to get. First off is 1, make yourself a forge. You can look it up on YouTube. There's 100,000 different ways you can make a forge. Second thing, find an anvil. Now, one of the best things that you can get for an anvil, since most people can't afford to buy an actual anvil. And no, Harbor Freight anvils are not anvils. Those are anvil-shaped objects. They are made out of cast iron and will deform on impact of the hammer and could possibly break on you. The best thing I've found so far for an anvil is railroad track. I've ordered them on eBay before, worked good, and I've had Misbehaven's uncle actually generously give me a big hunk of railroad track, and I've done tests on it, taken full sledgehammer swings to it. It doesn't even leave a dent. Because you don't want your anvil to get miffed up. If you're trying to flatten out a piece of metal and make it smooth, it's kind of hard to do that when your anvil has chips and dings in it everywhere. Oh, and then the last thing out of the 3 would be a hammer. I would suggest a 24 or 32 ounce ball peen. With that, you can do generally almost anything you need to do with the knife. Of course, there's other tools that would make your life easier, like a grinder. But if you don't have a grinder, you could use just a regular metal file. I've done it. It's a pain in the ass, but yes, you can file down metal with a metal file. Which reminds me, another good metal for making knives are old metal files, or farrier rasps, or wood rasps. Those are made out of tool steel, which is very good. And if you want to get onto that topic, old ball peen hammers make excellent axe heads and tomahawks. You just pound out the hammerhead flat, put edge on it, and boom, you have yourself a really nice tomahawk. And you can even ask Misbehaving here. She's seen my little axe I made out of ball peen hammer go up against a commercially made axe, and how did it perform, honey?
It beat it out of the park.
There you go. Tool steels are actually, I do like working with tool steel. They seem to be able to take a lot of abuse. But yeah, if you're going to be starting out, I would say you at least need a forge, a hammer, a makeshift anvil, and I said hammers already, right?
Yes.
Okay, hammer, and I guess at least a file. With that, you can make a knife. And you can make a usable knife. It might not be pretty, it might not be the world's greatest knife, but it will be a knife, and you could probably cut something with it. Just don't cut yourself or your neighbor, unless your neighbor was an asshole.
Okay, so how do you make a knife?
Oh, okay. I was afraid you were going to ask me that. Okay, pretty much, depending on... Okay, let's be a little bit more specific. Tell me what kind of knife to make, and I'll make it right now.
Any kind of knife.
Any kind of knife. I don't know what that is.
Honey knife.
Okay, honey knife. What kind of honey knife?
I'm gonna smack you.
These are the kind of questions that every blacksmith has to know before he starts.
Just answer.
Okay. Let's just say I'm going to be making a Bowie knife. For a Bowie knife, I would prefer... I would say the spring steel. Those have made some pretty good Bowie knives. So I would take my piece of 5160 spring steel. I would cut it to shape, or not cut it to shape, I would cut it to length. I normally, when I'm forging, I will leave a little bit extra on the metal piece so I can grab onto. I hate tongs. Tongs are a pain in the ass. I'd rather have extra metal left on there so I can grab it while it's still hot without burning my hand off. Use gloves though.
Which he does not.
Yes, I do.
Liar.
Blah. But so, you put it into your forge, which I have a charcoal burning forge. I like the old school way. I'm not one of those guys who had power hammers and propane forges. I like fire. And I like smoke. And I like the sweat that beats off me when I pound it with my hammer. And that sounds weird now. So, pretty much you stick in your forge the steel. You have to make sure it's getting up to temperature. That's why you have to use the bellows or whatever air system to get the fire going until it gets red hot. Now, after it gets red hot, you can take it out, put on your anvil, brush off the scales, which are little cruddy pieces that develop on the outside of the blade, and you start pounding it into shape. Once the blade starts losing its color, stop hammering, because then you're hammering cold steel, which you could break it or put tons of stress in it, which, as I talked about earlier, stress is bad on a knife. They get stressed out, and if they get stressed out, you'll have to take them to a psychologist, and that becomes a whole hassle. Don't ever try and take a knife into a psychologist's office. You might be put away. What were we talking about? Oh, making a knife. Silly me. So yes, you hammer out the shape you want. For a Bowie knife, I would have blade, before putting on the edge, I would put blade edge down on the anvil and hammer the back front edge of it down flat. Now you might say to yourself, well, why are you doing the back side like that? Well, because when you flip it over and you start beveling, which is hammering in the edge, it's going to naturally curve the edge of the knife back. Because when you're hammering metal, it's not just flattening, it's moving. Yeah, you're flattening that piece, but that's because the metal is being moved somewhere. And normally it's being moved back. So if you're only hammering in an edge on one side of a blade, you'll notice the blade starts to bend in the opposite direction, and you'll constantly have to re-straighten it out unless that's the shape you're going for. And okay, so after I do that, if you want to have the edge hammered in good enough, you flatten it out good enough, I normally would let it sit out for a bit after heating it up red hot. Let it anneal, soften up a little bit. Then I go in for the heat treat, bring up as hot as I can without melting it, and plunge it into the oil, which I use vegetable oil. It's the cheapest oil I could really get. And once you have that, you inspect it for any cracks and warps in it. Now, if your blade warps, there's three things you can do. You can either do the risky route of, after you quench a knife, you plunge it in real fast, you give it like a second, and you pull it back out. And you have about a 10 to 12 second time gap of, if there's a bend or a warp, you can run over to the anvil and lightly hammer it back into shape. But that is such a risky thing. I've done it successfully once or twice, but I've also broken a few blades that way. So unless you really know what you're doing, I wouldn't suggest that. The safer route is to take it and temper it. And then tempering, which is normally I would just stick into my kitchen oven, put on to 500 or 450 degrees, let it sit for an hour, turn it off, let it cool down. And since the metal is softer and less prone to break on you, you could slowly try and get it out, not by hammering. Normally you find the pivot point of the bend, or the highest part of the bend or warp, and you set it on that side, or you sit flat down on that side with a little peg underneath the highest point of the bend, and with two two clamps on either side. Start slowly torquing up the tension until it starts bending back out. And you'll probably have to keep doing it until you'll have to do it quite a few times, and you'll have to bend it and exaggerate the bend in the opposite way quite a bit for it to keep that shape, because the steel, since you hardened it, it wants to stay in that form. But yeah, I've successfully done a few knives like that, gotten the bends out. It works, but you could still end up breaking the knife, and also it might not work. My beloved sword on the wall, I'll admit, it had a warp in it. I got the warp out for the most part. There's still a slight warp in it. Most people can't notice it, but I do because I'm a perfectionist. But still, it works well enough. And the other way is you could redo the heat treating process totally. You could reheat it up and reharden it. Or, well, you could reheat it up, flatten it out again, and reharden it. That takes a lot longer because you'll have to anneal it again, because you can't just keep heat treating the knife like that, because it will break. I've had knives break on me before like that. But it's a trial and error. There is a science to it, and it's just tricky. So if you're new at this, do not be discouraged about the first few knives that break or bend on you. It's inevitable. Like I said, my first thing I ever tried to forge was a sword. And I remember my shitty forge, I had the air system all hooked in horrible, where I only had like one blowhole blowing air into the forge, and it was a long forge since it had to fit a sword. It turned my forge into kind of a welder, and I ended up welding my sword in half. And so I take it out, like, oh, that's not good. My sword just fell apart. I remember I got so pissed, I said, I'm not good at this, blah. That's when my dad turned to me and said, stop being stupid, that's your first try. And I listened to him, and I stuck with it, and I'm not going to say I'm the greatest knife maker in the world, because I'm not. I have a lot more to learn, but I make pretty decent knives. I mean, people are willing to pay me for my knives, and they seem to be quite happy with them, so I must be doing something right. But, where was I going with this misbehaving?
I don't know. Where were you going with this?
I don't know.
Do you like what you do, I think?
Oh, yes. Oh yeah, we were making a Bowie knife, yes. So, let's just say you went through the heat treating, since I believe that's where we left off at. Heat treating went good, no cracks, no bends. Next step after you temper it, the polishing job, which is the most boring and tedious job. For you to have to polish out, well, depending. If you have fancy belt sanders and grinders, yeah, you could get high grit belts that you could polish them up that way. I do it by hand. I buy about 8 different grits of sandpaper, going all the way from 100 all the way up to 3,000 grit, and by hand for over an hour polishing my knives. It's so boring, which Misbehaving can testify too, since I've had her on that job once or twice before. How'd you like it?
Very tedious, but it was actually very good with stress.
Yes, and I'll admit it does end up being worth it after you've done and you see yourself smiling in that knife blade. And once that is done, you make whatever handle you want for it. I normally use red oak. It's pretty cheap hardwood. And yes, you want to use hardwood. You don't want to use just any random stick you see laying about. Depending on what kind of a buoy it is, or what type of tang you have on it, there's a... excuse me, sorry about that. There's two different tangs you can use on a knife. And a tang, if you don't know, is the metal part that has the handle in it, or under it. A stick tang is, like it suggests, just a stick that you put into a block of wood and you shape into whatever handle shape you want it. Normally you'll epoxy it or peen it in, which peening is pins. You can have a full tang knife, which the metal tang is the shape of the handle. I prefer that way myself because it gives you a very strong, sturdy knife that's less likely to break in the handle, which you can epoxy and peen that into. After that, sharpen the knife, polish up the handle, give a last spit polish to the blade, and you have yourself a fully functional working knife ready to gut or hack whatever you need. But I mean, I'm just gonna let you know right now, yeah, I don't expect anyone to be able to make a knife off what I'm telling you right now. So I'm hoping to get my forge set up soon so I can start putting out some videos and showing you how to do it. Because I remember I learned most of my crafts through YouTube myself. YouTube is great, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to take what I've learned from YouTube, address some issues with some of the ones I've seen on YouTube, and hopefully make a very clear video for a beginner to learn from. Take it back to you, Misbehaving.
Okay, what is your favorite thing about what you do?
One, every now and again I actually do make a buck or two off it. Two, it's very satisfactory taking something that was a piece of scrap metal and making it into a beautiful piece of work that could function as a good tool or a weapon.
Okay. Now, what is Damascus, or Damascus? I'm pronouncing that wrong.
Damascus.
Yes, and pattern welding.
Damascus and pattern welding is where you take multiple multiple layers of metal and forge weld them together, and through folding you make a solid piece of block metal. The difference is, correct me if I'm wrong out there, I've never worked with some before, but I've seen it done before. Pattern welded, if I'm not mistaken, is where you have different plates of all the same steel. You forge weld them together, you fold them how many other times as you want, making a bunch of layers, and you pound it out, and you get a neat pattern in the blade. From what I've seen, or it's debatable if it makes the knife any stronger or the blade any stronger. I would say sure it does make it a little bit stronger just from the layering and the compression of it. Vikings were well noted for pattern welded swords. You put acid coating on it, and it strips the top layer of the steel off, and it shows the pattern underneath the steel. Damascus, I believe, is where you have multiple types of steel. Sometimes even just regular wrought iron mixed in with steel. And you do the same thing with pattern welded, forge welding together. fold them however many times you want, and forge from there whatever blade you're trying to do. Same thing, I'm not sure if it makes the blades any stronger. Some people say it makes it weaker since you're not using the same metal, and some of the metal is going to be inferior compared to others. Either one I wouldn't want to get hit with. They do make pretty knives, but at the same time I can be biased because my blades I don't go for pretty, I go for functionality. I plan on doing Damascus and pattern welded blades, but personally I don't like them. Just not that I don't like them, actually. No, I take that back. I'm one of those no frills kind of guy. I don't want a knife that has an ivory handle, mirror polish on it with heads and stuff all carved and intricate throughout it. No, I want a plain, simple hunting knife that I can take out to the woods, beat the hell, and not worry about it. Next question, what you make?
What do you make besides knives?
I do make armor. I haven't. Most of the armor I make is for LARPing or live action role play. It's not made of the high quality steels that the knives are. Normally it's just regular, mild grade steel, cheap metal that I hammer pound into shape. Normally turns out looking pretty cool, but yeah, I wouldn't want to wear that into a real battle. I have made one armor, or I made a breastplate once for someone in the SCA, which had to be pretty good. Like, I actually had taken a real sword to it, and it held up. So I do armoring, but I don't do battle-ready armor. My armor would consist mostly of LARPing and costume armor. Just because for high-grade armor that you could actually take into battle, you do need a pretty substantial setup for it. You need to have a gigantic forge to heat big sheets of metal, to heat treat them, and eventually, sure, I would get into it, but right now, that's not my main focus.
Okay, so for the people who are beginning to get into forging, what kind of safety equipment do you suggest they get?
Well,
since you yourself have been to the hospital for getting metal in your eye.
Twice. And once for wood.
And almost cut your hand off.
Yes. Yes, I'm not a good example of safety. Use me as an example of why safety is important, though. Safety glasses. I've twice had metal sticking out my eye, and once a piece of wood sticking out my eye. Same eye, mind you.
And one time there was even rust on it because he waited so long to get to the hospital.
Yes. So definitely eye protection. I would suggest a good quality work apron, since I've caught my pants and shirt on fire multiple times.
A good expensive jacket on fire.
Yes. Work gloves. Those are always handy. I would suggest go down to Harbor Freight and buying one of the big heavy duty welding gloves. I think those are normally like $8 normally for the pair. Not a
I
bad
suggest boots because you don't want regular shoes that are going to catch on fire.
True. I've had tennis shoes start to smolder on me before. God, this is unsafe. I don't know if I should be doing this anymore. Oh my God. But no, in all seriousness, eyewear, apron, work gloves, and good boots. If you have long hair, I would suggest putting it back. When I had longer hair, I would always have a bandana. Also because, one, you don't want your hair to catch on fire or get singed from the heat. And misbehaving, looking at me weird, and want to know something. Would you like to have your hair singed off?
That's why your hair's cut.
Blah 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 blah. But, and also same thing with a beard. If you have a big long beard, keep that in mind. Always know where your beard is. What else? Oh, one little piece of advice I will give you. Work gloves are good, but in my personal preference, I don't like using them while forging. Except on my left hand because that's the hand I hold the steel with, but my hammering hand I don't. One, because it limits the feel on the hammer that I have, which is always good to have a good feel for your hammer. And two, sometimes, even though if you're using a high quality steel, sometimes you will get the rare spark or slag that shoots off it. When you're hammering, a spark or a piece of little metal comes off and lands in your glove. That hurts a lot. And then it's stuck in your glove, and you're fighting there trying to wiggle it out, and then you end up dropping your steel on the floor, and it's like, that's always a pain in the ass.
And what about breathing thing?
Oh, yeah. When you're forging, you have to stand right in front of the forge and just inhale all the smoke. All of it. Okay. Don't listen to that last part. No, it is recommended to have a breathing apparatus. I don't. I know I should. But, damn it, I don't like having to take it off to smoke. But, no. Especially if you're grinding. If you're using an angle grinder like I do for shaping and stuff, you need to wear one. I know every time I'm done grinding, I'll end up hacking up for the next 3 days black. And that's just all metal fragments going into your lungs and nose, and you know that can't be good for you.
And a good tip, drink while you're forging. When you get hurt, it hurts less.
Very good, actually. Now, don't get intoxicated, though. But no, having a brew or two while you're forging, it keeps your stress level low, so you don't flip out if something goes wrong. But do not play with fire while drunk.
No.
I know in movies they show people getting drunk every 2 seconds, but no, do not get drunk when handling hot metal or power tools. Also, stay hydrated. You're in front of a forge. You're going to get hot and sweat a lot. So keep a little bit of water near you also.
Okay, so why is steel the best metal to use?
Because iron would make a pretty shitty knife or sword.
Yeah, but isn't that what they use in all the video games?
Well, in video games they use like magical steel. But no, I mean back in the old days, yeah, the evolution of blades evolved. I mean some of the first blades were made out of stone, which then went into copper, which copper was a pretty shitty metal. If you ever handled copper, you can bend it with your hand. The benefit with that was you could actually cast them into shape. Now here's the thing, which makes copper and bronze, since bronze came after copper, which bronze is just copper with, I believe, 10% tin in it. I might be wrong in the exact measurements, but that's what I think. I think it's 1 part tin to every 10 parts brass. I might be wrong on that. But those you have to cast mold. Now that was a benefit over stone, because stone was much sharper. But cast molding, you can make bigger weapons and make them more to specifications. After bronze came iron. Iron was a big leap, much stronger metal than iron, but still pretty soft, still couldn't hold an edge, and still prone to breaking. It wasn't through, which we still don't know how exactly they developed steel. Could have been from accident, or it could have been just through luck, but steel was created from melting down iron past its normal melting point until it was 100% liquid, and all the impurities were taken out. Because iron back in the old days, they would literally just take rocks of iron, put it into a forge, heat them up, clump them together, and just start hammering on it. And like smushing this big, ugly rock thing into a bar of metal. Which was full of impurities, full of slag, prone to breaking, couldn't keep an edge. But I guess still better than walking into battle with a stick. But yeah, it's just a brief, shitty, drunk version of the history of knives, or evolution of knives and steel.
Okay, so how long does it take to make a knife?
It really just depends on the skill and what kind of knife you're making. I remember when I first started, it would take me days to complete a knife, but now I can knock out maybe 2 knives in a day if everything goes well. If you're doing like a sword will probably take you a week to do, unless you're just a machine.
What about an axe?
Axe, if you're doing just a regular hatchet, a day. If you're doing like a giant like Dane axe, probably still within a day, maybe 2 if you're trying to make it perfect.
Okay, how much does it cost to make a sword?
That's a tricky question. Are you talking about just the materials to make it, or all the equipment that you need to make it?
The materials.
Buying it commercially or through a junkyard?
However you would do it.
I would probably just use scrap metal from like a leaf spring, which if you try and find someone you know that has an old car or truck that is junk, see if you can snag a few leaf springs off it, or if not, go down your local dump or car dismantlery. I know normally I'll go down to a place called Ecology out here. For $30 I can get quite a few leaf springs from them. So let's just say if you had to buy from the junkyard, $30 there. $5 for the wood for the handle. If you're buying your charcoal, say $30 for charcoal. If you're buying all the sandpaper to give it a nice polish, that's like at least $60 right there. Grinding discs, another $10 to $15 there if you're conservative. So yeah, if you're going to make a store, it's going to cost you anywhere between, depending if you get some of the stuff for free, between $50 and $100. Which I know you can probably buy a sword online for that, but at the same time, those are probably like the cheap Chinese swords that will break and are just wall hangers. There is a big difference between wall hanger swords and forged swords.
Well, how much does it cost to make a knife?
A knife, material-wise, about less than $10, really.
What about an axe?
About the same, really. Maybe a couple of dollars more, if that.
Okay. How sharp are the knives, swords, and axes you make?
Kind of depends on the style of knives. You got certain knives you don't want to have super sharp. Like a machete, you do not want a machete super sharp because you're just going to keep busting that edge up. But my knives are pretty sharp. I know 2 of my friends so far that I've given knives to, the first day they end up cutting themselves pretty badly. I know I always do a razor test on them, which I can shave my arm with one of them. That gets a go from me. I've had a few knives that I don't even know how I got them that sharp. I've had one knife that I just look at it and it like cuts you. I'm not trying to brag, but still, that one knife, dear God, that scared me. I didn't even want to hold that knife.
Okay, last question. How do you etch stuff on metal?
Well, if you're not doing just a traditional engraving, which you can either do with a Dremel or the old-fashioned way with metal chisels, which, screw that. You can do what I do, electro-etching, which with a vinegar and salt solution, you take, sorry, had a mind fart there. Pretty much what you need to get your steel, and what I use is a car battery charger. I've heard of some people even using some of the big D batteries and splicing and doing some weird thing with it. I'm not sure. But you take the negative, you attach that to the knife blade, and with the positive, with a cotton swab clamped in there, you dab it in your vinegar and salt solution. You let it sit for a few minutes. While that's sitting, take some blue painter's tape, put it on your knife blade, and you cut out whatever design you want. Turn on the power to the battery charger, and just keep dabbing it on the pattern that you put, and slowly it will start burning a image on there. It won't. Normally it doesn't turn out super clean, but it's a cheap way of doing it. There's more sophisticated ways to do it. I'm not quite sure the process is going into them. I haven't done anything with those.
Is there any safety tips in doing that?
Well, if you're using a car charger, don't touch the two ends together, or else you're going to get a nasty spark. Don't put the positive to the knife blade, or else you're going to burn it badly. And don't drink any of the stuff.
Okay, well, we're going to end this episode here. I hope this was very informative to all you knife makers out there that are just beginning. I would like to thank my co-host, Wolf Bane. Thank you for answering all these questions.
Not a problem.
Stay tuned for more episodes, and have a good night.
Good night.